más preámbulos, yo le quiero dar inicio a una conferencia que nos tiene muy emocionados a nosotros. Y es, ¿quién se ha tomado un café en Starbucks? Bueno, hemos conquistado un mercado interesante. Imagínense que esta compañía que hoy nos parece como tan obvia, que la vemos por todas partes, que uno viaja a todos los países y uno siempre dice, ve, ¿dónde queda el Starbucks más cerca? Y va y se toma un cafecito y le parece pues que es un ambiente como ya conocido, se siente uno como cómodo y seguro en este lugar. Pues esta compañía nació en Seattle, Washington. En Seattle, Washington, cuando 3 personas se dieron cuenta de que habían ordenado café de algún lugar fuera del estado y entonces identificaron que había una oportunidad de mercado. Cuando conversaron y dijeron, ¿por qué los 3 estamos pidiendo café de un lugar fuera de Seattle? Dijeron, ¿podríamos nosotros hacer un negocio de esto? Entonces, tenemos hoy a uno de los cofundadores de Starbucks Coffee Company y fundador de QuartermaindeCoffeeRoasters y socialbees.com. Zev Siegl ha desarrollado 6 empresas de nueva creación, incluyendo Starbucks Café, y ha servido como consultor para propietarios y directores de más de 200 nuevas empresas y compañías en etapa temprana. Así que recibámoslo con un aplauso a Crecer Camp. Bienvenido, Zev.
Gracias. Gracias, Marisol. Gracias a ustedes. Y muchísimas gracias a Uncle Dex. Now in English. I've been in Colombia for 5 days. This is my first trip here. In 5 days, I've been to 15 coffee bars. I like coffee bars. And I have not yet been to a Starbucks, but I will. The importance of coffee cannot be underestimated in Colombia, can it? Starbucks today is a $20 billion company. Sales this year are going to be $20 billion. That's a B, billion. And it's a global corporation. I think you understand that. It has 25,000 stores, just like the ones that you go to. 25,000. It's in 70 countries, including Colombia, where, here in Bogota, there's more than a dozen Starbucks stores. But Starbucks began as a startup with 1 store, something that I think many of you could sympathize with. And here's our first logo. It's a logo from another time, isn't it? And I think that you'll agree by the end of my talk that the first decade of Starbucks, which was the 1970s, is full of good ideas for today's new ventures. You and I do mean you and we, actually have a lot of business knowledge. I am not the only person in the room who understands a great deal about business. I've been talking to you, so I know. I think that by working with the leaders, especially the younger leaders of new ventures, that we can do a great deal to increase the number of successes over what it would be otherwise. And by doing that, we can help our countries, we can help our cities, help their economies grow. And more successes, obviously, is what Crecer Camp has been about. So we can help new venture people like these guys, people who have just started a new company. And if these people, by the way, happen to be somebody who works for you in your company, which is totally possible, you might have an opportunity to expand your company from inside, because many new ventures happen inside existing companies. To get guys like this to listen, men and women to listen, we need to be coaches. It doesn't work very well to be a professor. And the best way to do that is to ask questions. We don't tell them what to do. People don't want to be told what to do. What kind of questions? How about starting with the issues that we know have killed other startup businesses? And one of those, of course, would be how much funding do you need and how much funding do you have? If we ask questions, it enables people like these to discover the answer for themselves. An answer like, oh gosh, I need more money than I thought I did. So I encourage new venture people to be right from the start. If you look at the screen, you'll see that there's an athlete sort of rocketing out of the starting blocks. I'm going to show you something. This is the men's 200-meter hurdles race, 110-meter hurdles race. It has 10 hurdles, and you can see them going over them. You know, there's lots of energy. There's something blocking your path every few seconds. You need a coach to do this. You need a plan. Gee, that sounds just like a new venture, doesn't it? These, by the way, this is, her name is Lina Flores. She's Colombian, and you can see she's flying over her 10 hurdles. And instead of talking about the hurdles race, we're going to talk about 10 business hurdles that block your path. So what happens if the new venture, say a new venture that you're trying to help, isn't quite ready for the race? What would happen? I think it's pretty easy to understand. That's what happens. You know, there are many ways to trip and fall and hurt yourself in a race like this. And in business, same thing. And we can help the leaders of new ventures avoid crashing like this. We can help them succeed. We need them to succeed because they're our future. So let's ask them how they plan to get over the 10 business hurdles. So to make it easy, I've divided the 10 hurdles into 3 groups, and they're playing out before you right on the screen. I'm going to use a lot of examples from the first few years of Starbucks, and some from later on. And before I go any further, I want to remind the audience that I'm a co-founder of Starbucks. It's true, I was one of 3. I was a C-level executive with the company. I was a member of the board. But today, I'm here as an independent voice. But I can tell you that as a founder, I really admire how the company has developed. So here's our first hurdle. There's the first group of hurdles. Here's our first hurdle. The right type of business. Starbucks, today, looking back, I'd say it looks like it was a right type of business. It's very successful. And I think it's important that you understand something about the 3 founders. I'm going to show you a picture of us that was taken 2 years before we thought of the idea of coffee. Those are the illustrious founders of Starbucks. And I am sure I can see in your faces, how did those 3 pendejos ever think of an idea like Starbucks? Well, I can tell you, the first time we thought of the idea of Starbucks was at a lunch we were having. That's Jerry Baldwin on the right and Gordon Bowker on the left, and I'm the guy in the middle. We were having lunch, as we did several times. We were trying to think of an idea for business. We wanted a little more excitement from our lives. You know, we all had jobs. And the waiter at the end of the lunch came over to the table. Remember, this is 1970. He came over to the table and said, "Would you gentlemen," he was being nice to us, "would you gentlemen like to have a cup of espresso?" And we looked at each other and said, "Oh yes, we certainly would." And a few minutes later, the waiter appeared with 3 cups, little tiny cups of espresso. And then he left us to continue talking. And as an afterthought, we each picked up the cup and took a sip. That coffee was terrible. I mean, it was the worst cup of beverage I've ever had in my life. It was bitter and awful and didn't have much flavor. But that was really common in the United States at that time. Coffee was very low in quality. It's hard to believe today. We started talking about coffee because, we had just had a terrible cup. And to our complete surprise, it turned out that 2 of us in the previous 3 months had ordered gourmet coffee beans, a bag of beans, from companies in other cities because we just were curious about coffee. And we looked at each other and said, 2 of the 3 of us just ordered coffee beans from another city? Could there be a demand in Seattle that we are maybe not the only ones who would be interested in coffee? That was just 3 young men noticing a demand that might not be met, but that was the first spark of Starbucks, that bad cup of coffee. And we did what I hope any new venture person would do. We started researching the coffee business. We talked with business experts, and we did experiments with coffee. I took a trip to New York, and then I took another trip to San Francisco to do some research to see other specialty food businesses. And then at the end of 2 months of research, the 3 of us decided, I think we have a right idea here. This could work. And we decided to go ahead and open the company. That was a very good decision, don't you think? Good decisions have been made at Starbucks ever since. Some bad ones too, but there have been a lot of good decisions. For example, in the 1970s, after some early experimenting, we decided to focus only on coffee. We stopped selling spices. If you were quick, you noticed in the logo that there was the word spices. And we eventually shrank our tea department because, as I'll explain later, we weren't selling much tea. And we gave up some income to do that. And in all of our stores, we continued for a decade to give away little samples of brewed coffee. Why would you give away coffee? We didn't sell beverages yet because we were trying to get people to buy our coffee and brew it at home. That was the 70s. In the 80s began with a very good decision. The company hired a man named Howard Schultz. And he was hired to be the vice president of sales and marketing. And as things turned out, that was a pretty good decision. Because a few years later, Howard Schultz and a group of investors purchased Starbucks, which was only in Seattle, and Mr. Schultz became the CEO. Interestingly enough, he is still the jefe at Starbucks. He's the man. And immediately, Starbucks began opening coffee bars. They're a little bit like the coffee bars you see today. Not so sexy, but they were good. In the 1990s, the company started bringing in executives from other companies that were bigger than Starbucks. They hired them to increase the strength of the management. And also at that same time, Starbucks in the 90s, Starbucks began investing in things like new operating systems, training, and internal communications so that everyone in the company would be working toward the same goals. I think many of you understand that if you don't make that investment, there's going to be too much employee turnover, growth is going to slow down, and operating profit could start to go down. Starbucks in the 90s was building the capacity for double-digit global growth. And toward the end of the 90s, it did go global. In 1996, Starbucks opened its first overseas store. It was in Japan, in Tokyo. To do that, Starbucks had an overseas partner in Japan, a large company that knew how to do that, had lots of local knowledge, very useful. And in 1998, Starbucks did something else that they have done repeatedly since then. They offered stock options to its employees. Now, usually that would mean that 15 senior managers got some stock options, right? No. This was for everybody, right down to the baristas. And that was a big decision. It was kind of revolutionary at the time. Starbucks got a lot of attention for that. Frankly, more benefits have been added since that time. The right type of business. Whoop, come on, guys. My clicker is not clicking. ¿Qué pasa? Is it the clicker or something else? The right type of business. Nope, that went too far. Oh, I see what happened. Sorry, now I clicked it several times. We'll catch up to this. Can you give me back up a little bit? Yep, more. Thank you. So this is the procession from the 70s to the present day. You can see the logo evolving. The right type of business. You know, the leader of a new venture needs to understand what type of business they're actually in. I'm going to show you a list. And before I show you the list, I want to tell you I'm going to show you several lists today. You don't have to worry about it. You can download them from my website. I put them there just for you. If you go to my website, here's the address, or you can just Google my name. Just Google my name, you'll find it. And right under the picture of me, it says Crecer Camp Lists. That's just for you. So here is the first list. What type of business is the new venture going to be in? These are some of the major types of business. Retail, the first one, I can tell you includes both the kind of retail store that you walk into, and it also includes the kind of retail that you log onto, virtual retail. And services, which is in the second column, services, that's actually a pretty big category and includes all kinds of consulting companies, like social media consultants. It includes food delivery companies, and even building maintenance companies. Those are all different kinds of services. So where does your company fit on this list? Is your company represented here? What kind of business are you in? And if you're talking to somebody who's starting a new venture, what kind of business are they in? Do they really understand what they're doing? I can tell you that Starbucks, for its first 9 months, its first year, was only in one of these categories, retail. We had one retail store. And I'm going to show it to you. This is what it looked like when it opened. 1971. We sold fresh roasted coffee beans, tea, spices, and lots of ways to brew coffee. We did not yet sell beverages. We could have gone on to develop more and more stores without doing anything else, just staying in the retail category. But we didn't do that. We had another good idea. We became a manufacturer. We started roasting coffee in a separate facility. And then in year 2, we became a distributor because we started selling to restaurants, hundreds of them. And we also eventually started selling to supermarkets. In 1984, after the change in ownership, Starbucks became a food service company because it began opening coffee bars. Coffee bars are food service. And after the year 2000, Starbucks added an e-commerce website, virtual retail. And at that point, Starbucks was in 4 of these categories, and it still is in at least 4 of these categories. The right type of business. Oh, what's that? Does anyone know what that is? What is it? It's a chemical formula, right? Some of you, that's a chemical formula. What's it the chemical formula for? It's caffeine. This is the chemical formula for caffeine. And why would I put it on the screen in the middle of a talk about the right type of business? Well, caffeine gives you a nice lift, shall we say. And once you've experienced that lift the first time, the next morning you come back and you do it again. And the next morning, and then the rest of your life. Coffee has a very pleasant lift to it. You know, there are other products that people buy repeatedly and use repeatedly. It really helps if your business is irresistible. Makes it a right type of business. You know, in addition to caffeine, profit was the second thing that made Starbucks a right type of business. Profit. In the company's first decade, we earned 2 profits on every bag of coffee that we sold in our stores. We earned a profit for manufacturing, roasting the coffee, and we also earned a second profit for retailing in our own stores. 2 profits, nice work. That's called vertical integration, by the way, the technical name for it. So when Starbucks began to sell brewed coffee and espresso drinks, that was in 1984, that added a 3rd profit margin. Now you have 3 levels of vertical integration. And I can tell you that when you have 3 profits in your company, 3 levels of profit, you can do a lot of good things. And that is the answer to the question, why are there so many little companies that roast coffee and have coffee bars? Because they're enjoying the pleasure of 3 levels of profit. For example, here in Bogota, you have, among others, Devotion and Bourbon. They roast and have coffee bars. So it's caffeine and profit margins. 2 good reasons, huh? For the right type of business. When you and me, when we're coaching the leaders of new ventures, let's ask them to tell us why their idea is a right idea. So I'd like you to imagine for a minute that you've made an appointment to meet someone at a coffee bar like El Atillo here in Bogota. And you're going to talk to this person. They have a good idea for a business, and you know about business, so you're going to try and help them. You know, is their idea going to be a right type of business? Is it? Well, here's a list of 6 more questions that you can talk to them about. You could say to them, are you really interested in this? Are you passionate about it? Do you think you have the capabilities? That's a very good question. Is there really a demand? No, not just in your head. Is there a demand out there from customers? Can you connect with those customers at a reasonable cost? Do you think you can raise enough capital? After the company is running, is it going to be profitable? You know, these are questions that lead to very interesting conversations with new venture people. Come on, baby, you can do it. No, there we go. So it's important to understand right versus wrong ideas for a business. Helps if you know what kind of business you're in. And it's a good idea to discuss that list that I just went through. Bang, new hurdle. In business, the hurdles just keep coming at you, don't they? What is a competitor? Well, we can't talk about this all night, but I can tell you one thing that we really need to do with new venture people is we need to ask them about direct and indirect competition. For example, if you sell oil, petroleum, the other oil companies in your market area are your direct competitors. You sell oil, they sell oil. Who are your indirect competitors? Well, I would say it's businesses that sell electricity, natural gas, solar power, wind power. You sell oil, and they sell the other forms of energy. They are your indirect competitors. Why am I going through this with you?
because new venture people, first of all, don't have much respect for their direct competitors. That's why they got into business, because they don't think the direct competitors are good at what they're doing. And when it comes to indirect competitors, they don't even want to think about that. What's an indirect competitor? But it's very helpful to know who they are. So what about Starbucks? You know, with 25,000 stores, do you have competitors? Oh yeah, you have a lot of competitors. And first of all, in direct competition, they have two types, not just one type. They have direct low-cost competitors. On the left, these are from the United States. On the left, 7-Eleven. Here's a number for you. Every day in the United States, 7-Eleven, which has a lot of stores, sells 1 million cups of coffee every day. Think of all those cups. Why? Well, it's $1 a cup. And those other two pictures that you're looking at, that's 7-Eleven. In the United States, that's McDonald's. I apologize. On the right, McDonald's has 14,000 stores in the United States. It's a lot. Many of them have a commercial espresso machine. And do you think their prices are lower than Starbucks? Mm-hmm, they are. So Starbucks has direct low cost. Then Starbucks has what I call direct same cost. These are some of the companies. If you notice, Juan Valdez is there. The direct same cost, you know, there are 30,000, more than 30,000 little coffee companies. Most of them are just coffee bar companies in the United States. So Starbucks has direct same price and direct low price competitors. Everywhere in the United States, right here in Bogota. What about indirect competition for Starbucks? This may surprise you. Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, and here in Colombia, the brands that Postobon sells. Soda and bottled water are major indirect competition for coffee. Both types of companies sell beverages. So it's important when you're talking with new venture people that you get them to identify who their direct and indirect competitors are, and tell them that even Starbucks has competitors, lots of them. Bang, another hurdle. I'm telling you, it's just like business. Every time you go to work, there's something else. This is government regulation, and this is a hurdle where many businesses trip and fall and crash to the ground. So I beg you, let's ask new venture people to be sure they learn the rules. There are local rules in cities. There are provincial regulations that affect businesses, and there are national, federal policies that affect it. And if you ignore the rules, let me tell you, the surprises are very expensive, and they're very painful. And I've seen a few cases where paying no attention to government regulation was deadly, killed the business. We're over our first group. This is a summary of what I just said. Now we're going to go on to the second group. Now, group 2 is a lot of fun because it's about money. So the first one in this group is the right amount of money. The right amount of money. I'm going to show you a picture of one of my partners, Jerry Baldwin. God, that's a funny picture. This is Jerry. It's 1974. Starbucks has been in business for 3 years. By the way, if you look very carefully at Jerry's right elbow, you'll see that he has an adding machine next to him. No computers. It's 1974. That came a year or two later. But Jerry is still a terrific financial manager. And he did our finances. And he did them first without a computer. And he made sure that we were financially in the right position, that we had the right amount of money. Now, I really don't want to leave you with this picture of Jerry. This is what he looked like a few years later. He's getting married in this picture, and he looks really nice. So in our second year, in 1972, I'm going to share a little secret with you. Starbucks grew a little too fast. And you might think to yourself, oh gosh, that's really great. They were growing faster than they expected. Now, the bankers in the room know what that means. If you grow too fast, you need money to pay for that growth. And you need more money than you thought you did because you're growing faster than you thought you did. So Jerry developed a new plan for the right amount of money. And we did a little stock offering. And 4 of our friends, people we knew, purchased the stock. They liked what we were doing. And I can tell you that 10 years later, when the company was sold, those 4 people were really happy.
They need a plan for how much money they're going to need. And I'm not talking about a plan full of words. I'm talking about a plan full of numbers. Numbers, my friends, is the language of business. On the left, these are documents that we use in the United States quite a bit. I'm sure you have something similar. On the left, there is a separate sheet for the expenses of the startup. And I'll explain why that's separate later. And then the other 3, in the United States, we call them a cash flow statement, a profit and loss statement, and a balance sheet. Many leaders of new ventures do not know how to create these sheets. They have a great idea, but they don't know this part. There are also leaders who can't create these sheets, but they also can't even read them yet. Can't read them yet. We can coach them, and they can learn. And if they can't learn, we can find experts that will help them with this problem, because you need to know your financial future. And what is it that happens if they just won't do it? I've heard people say, I'm just not a numbers kind of person. Maybe you've heard that too. Well, I can show you exactly what happens. Remember? That's what happens. They aren't going to finish the race. So some of you here, you might think I'm being a little too basic about this, that everyone knows that you need to be aware of how much money you need, right? Well, if that's true, then why do so many new ventures run out of money at the 3rd hurdle? They don't finish. So it's important. This is what we should ask them. Do you know the right amount of money that you're going to need to start your company and keep it going for a while? And this is the key question, by the way, is that money in your bank account already? And the answer to these questions, 2 questions, should be yes and yes. Forecasting. There's a word there that says correct forecasting. Not just forecasting, but correct forecasting. So most of us are really pretty familiar with spreadsheets, using Excel to make documents. And have you ever seen a spreadsheet that had a mistake in it? Well, of course you have, because there are always mistakes in spreadsheets, especially when you first do it. Well, it's important for leaders of new ventures to find the mistakes in their forecasts before someone important notices. Who would be someone important? A potential investor. A banker who might want to make a loan. What if they see a mistake in the forecast? Usually that means they have to go to a lunch appointment right now. The meeting's over. So what mistakes is it that people make on spreadsheets? This could be painful for some of you. If you know what they are, you can spot them really quickly. And if you know what they are, you can help someone who's got a good idea for a business. So here we go. I have years of experience of working with entrepreneurs. This is not just me, this is a lot of experience. Sometimes there's a bad formula in the spreadsheet. And if there's a bad formula on line 27, these guys know that the whole line will be wrong because the formula is always carried across. There could be an inventory error. Almost always there's an inventory error, and here's the error. Sales grow, inventory never grows. They buy the initial inventory, and then in the spreadsheet, they never buy another dollar worth of merchandise. Well, that's crazy. You have to have more inventory as sales grow. Sales estimates. Have you ever seen a new business that had a sales estimate that looked like it was a little too high? Well, I've made them, so I know. And also a common mistake is that sales ramp up really quickly. Sometimes life doesn't work like that. Accounts receivable. If you're in a wholesale business, these are amounts that your customers owe you. You've delivered the goods and they're going to pay you next week. Well, accounts receivable also have to grow with sales. The more sales you have, the more accounts receivable you have. I like to see the startup costs separated. And why is that? Well, it's because I know that new venture people underestimate the amount of money it's going to take to start their company. It's a natural tendency. But by putting them on a separate sheet, you can see that. And then weak research. This could have said bad research. It's important to do research when you're doing forecasts. If the research isn't done very well, then the numbers aren't correct. What we want to see new venture people do is make what I call an educated guess based on research. What you often see is a wild guess based on I don't know what. So let's ask these questions. Come on, baby. So this is a summary. Look for the common errors when you're helping someone and get them to do a separate sheet for the startup costs. Alternative funding. This is my favorite part. This is what I call free money, alternative funding. Most people who start companies for the first time think that you get a loan from the bank and you probably get some money from investors. And that's debt and equity. That's true. You frequently do need both of those. But there are lots of other ways to make sure you have enough capital. For example, there's crowdsourcing. In the United States, it might be Kickstarter. You need $20,000 to do some experimenting leading to opening your company. So you put it up on Kickstarter, and maybe you'll get $20,000. And what do you owe those people for that $20,000? Not very much. In Latin America, there are other crowdsourcing sites. Ideame is one that I've heard of, but maybe there are others. Prepayment from customers. Oh, sorry, government programs first. Government programs, in many countries, governments help new companies get a little better rate on their interest on their loans, or maybe a loan guarantee so the bank is more likely to make it. And I have seen also in some countries programs where an entrepreneur can get money if they will hire workers who don't now have jobs. Look at training money. Free money! I love free money. You can postpone purchases. That's what Starbucks did. We needed 2 big roasting machines. We bought one after 9 months in business, and the next one we didn't buy for 2 years. We could have bought them both at the same time and saved a little money, but it was money that we didn't have yet. You can grow slowly. This is counterintuitive. Starbucks grew very slowly in its first 12 years. It was only in Seattle. It wasn't in Bogota, and it wasn't in Kuwait, and it wasn't in Kuala Lumpur. It was only in Seattle. And slow growth meant that we didn't need as much money from investors. So why is that a big deal? I'll tell you why it's a big deal. Because when the company was sold, the founders still owned almost all of the stock because we didn't need so many investors because we grew slowly. Doesn't work all the time, but it does work sometimes. Customer prepayment. Oh gosh, you can get your customers to pay before you deliver? Well, actually you can in some industries. In construction, nobody starts a construction project without a down payment. To put on an event like this, I am sure that the bank had to make a deposit to the people who organize this. And if you're in the catering business, you don't bake the cake until you have a deposit. Well, if you get deposits in the first month of business, you need less money from investors. Free rent or delayed rent. I don't know the situation in Colombia, but in the United States, if your company needs physical space and you're going to sign a lease, people frequently negotiate for a free month at the beginning of the lease because you're going to be remodeling, you're not open for business, and a free month at the end of the lease, say after 3 years, if you've made the payments on time. Free money when you ask for that free rent. And finally, do it yourself. In the United States, we have a wonderful name for this. It's called sweat equity. You do work yourself that you would have to pay others with money that you'd have to get from investors. I'm going to show you what sweat equity looks like in January of 1971. It's the three founders of Starbucks. We built the first store ourselves with a lot of help from family members and from friends. Do-it-yourself was a major source of funding for Starbucks. Now today, you wouldn't have to get paint all over your clothes. Today, it might be that you write code for a game or software. You do it yourself. Or it might be that you develop a phone app while you're going to school because you're going to be selling some great phone apps. So this is a summary. It says alternative funding can reduce the amount of debt and equity that's needed. I call that free money. Who are you going to get the money from? We call those people funders. People who give you money. That would be bankers, normally, and investors. It can make a huge difference who the new venture gets the money from. Lots of people have money, but some people also have business connections, ideas for less expensive vendors that you don't know about, connections to a customer that you haven't thought about, maybe a new insight. In my experience, new venture people don't really think about this too much. They're just so excited to get money from anyone. But it does make a difference. Investors all can invest money, but some of them can offer more than money. The right funders. Ratios and percentages. You know, ratios and percentages, this is not a mathematics class. They're just a quick and easy way to communicate how two things in a company operation relate to each other. And we need to notice when we're talking to a new venture person, if they're speaking using ratios and percentages. Because if you don't hear ratios and percentages, I think that's a symptom that there might be a problem. So it's important to know those ratios if you're starting a business. And I'm going to tell you a little Starbucks story. It's about percentages. So during the first years of Starbucks, we sold coffee, tea, and spices. And tea, we knew, because we tabulated such things, tea was 2% of sales. 2%, that's nothing. And we were able to say to the people working in the company, you know, tea is just 2% of sales. And everybody instantly knew that tea really wasn't much of a business for us. We didn't have to explain it after saying 2%. Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, you should have promoted tea so it could be 5% of sales. Well, we tried that and it didn't work. Our customers wanted coffee from us. They didn't want tea. But without using percentages, you know, we might not have known that. Now, in many countries, fortunately, there are databases, sometimes these are on the internet too, databases of what typical percentages and ratios, operating ratios, are for many types of businesses. I think it's a good idea to ask any new venture person if they happen to have found that information. New venture people need to know their ratios. They're great for communicating ideas, and they're terrific for measuring performance. So we finished the middle group. Now we come to our final group. En español. Este es el último grupo. El último grupo de ideas. Y lo que significa que estamos cerca de la clausura y del cóctel. Y estaré aquí, allí. Y estaré aquí, allí. See you later. The ninth hurdle. Can a business person like you or like me have all the knowledge and skills that a new venture requires? I do not know everything. And I don't think anyone knows everything. And that is why you and people who are starting new companies put together a team of people. If you notice, I didn't say employees, because some of the most important people on the team are not employees. We've been in business for 8 years at this point, 1978. We can afford suits now. Gordon Bowker on the right is a fabulous marketing strategist. He's a real big picture guru, great guy. And we had learned that about him. We knew now what our skills were. And we surprised each other quite a bit. Jerry Baldwin on the left has a brilliant business mind. And he's an excellent financial manager, as I said before. And he's a good leader. And my strengths at that time were in developing new lines of business and managing retail operations, and also in leasing good locations for our next store. You don't have to have partners to be successful. But you do have to have a team. We had a special person on our team that I'd like to tell you about. He wasn't a partner. He wasn't a manager. He wasn't an executive. He wasn't an employee. He was a mentor to us, un mentor. And here he is. This is Alfred Peet. That's on the left as we first met him, and on the right as an older person. And he was a famous pioneer in the gourmet coffee trade in the United States. He is the founder of Peet's Coffee in San Francisco. He opened it in 1966, and that was 5 years before Starbucks opened. Mr. Peet taught the founders of Starbucks about coffee. He was very much like an uncle to us. He was a kind of a tough uncle. He didn't own any shares of Starbucks, and he didn't want any payments from us. He was in San Francisco, and we were in Seattle, and he just wanted to see us succeed. Now, Mr. Peet died quite a few years ago. But I can tell you that I wouldn't be standing here on the stage without his help. The right team. In the first decade of Starbucks, we also had other outside people, outside advisors, who met with us. We had discussions with them. Some of them were owners of other businesses. One of them was a really interesting accountant. There was an attorney, and there was a really interesting fellow who owned a marketing and advertising agency. We also had, as you might imagine, wonderful managers and employees. This is when Starbucks was only in Seattle. Coffee attracts good people. Starbucks still attracts good people, and it trains them well. And that is why when you go into one of the stores, the experience is so nice. A team is larger than the founder and the owner. It's important to hire good people and train them. I think it's very useful to find a good mentor. And I also think it's very effective to have a circle of outside advisors and to meet with them. Hurdle number 10, the last hurdle. When you clear in the race, when you clear the last hurdle, then you sprint for the finish. Marketing, what is it? It's everything about how people perceive and experience a business. It is much, much more than advertising. It's your brand. It's your website. It's the research that you do. In some ways, it's the products and the services that you sell to your customers. It's your social media. And yes, it's your advertising too. And over the past 45 years, Starbucks has been an excellent marketing organization. In my opinion, absolutely first rate. And they've created a powerful brand. And I'm going to give you an example of what happens when you have a powerful brand. So Starbucks has 25,000 stores, and almost all of them are in great locations that are very visible from the street. But it also has another presence, especially in the United States. And you can't see it from the street. It's inside supermarkets. Starbucks has managed to sell a variety of products to supermarkets. It's a big business for Starbucks. And I'm not talking about bags of coffee. Yes, in the United States, Starbucks has lots of bags of coffee in almost every supermarket. It's other things. Let's look at a couple of them. On the left is a coffee department of one of the really big coffee chains, supermarket chains in the United States. On the right is another photograph from that store. And if you look in the middle, there's some green and red packages. Those are packages of something called Starbucks Refreshers. Refreshers. Those are packages of fruit drink crystals. You add water and it makes a really great drink. I think they were serving some of it today at the break. I'd like to point out that that's not coffee. That's brand extension. That's what a strong brand will do for you. And here, in another place in the supermarket, on the left is canned strong coffee. And on the right, bottles of milk with wonderful syrups in them and a little bit of coffee. This is packaged beverages. Packaged beverages. It's not really coffee, it's brand extension. And these are packages of little capsules with coffee inside. And the capsules fit into inexpensive coffee makers. You probably have seen them. And it's a very convenient way to brew coffee. This type of brewing has become very popular in the United States, but I see it here too. This, in my opinion, this is more than just another way to sell coffee. This is brand extension. And this is the ultimate. We're inside a supermarket, another big chain, and what has Starbucks done here? They've been asked to put an entire coffee bar inside this supermarket, and there are thousands of these around the United States. Now, if you've ever tried to get a product on the shelf in a supermarket, a product that you make, you know how impossible this is. But this is a very strong brand, and the supermarkets that do this think it's in their interest. There's another way that companies can reach their customers with the right marketing. Companies, for-profit businesses, can do good things in their communities. I'm talking about projects that are going to help the way the community looks, like improving a park, or maybe it's going to help in another way. And when companies do this, it attracts customers. Oh, you want more than our money to buy coffee? Oh, you actually are trying to help our lives. I can't wait to buy more things from you. In the United States, this is called corporate social responsibility. Sometimes it's abbreviated CSR. Some people refer to this as social conscience in business. I'm going to show you a picture of one of the biggest corporate social responsibility projects I've ever seen, and it happens to be from Starbucks. It's called the China Education Project. Starbucks gave a mountain of money to this project. It's in China. It's a project that provides training to teachers who work with children like this. It's teacher training. There was a great need for it at the time in China. And Starbucks did not dream up this program. They didn't start the program. They didn't operate the program. They just provided financial support. And then they did what any smart business should do. They promoted it. They let people in China know, hey, we're doing something really great in your country. Starbucks has now, as of today, 2,600 stores in China alone. 26,000, that's a lot of stores. This is not the only reason, their China education project, but it must have helped. So I would urge you to say to anybody opening even a small business, what could you do in your community that would make people love you more? It doesn't have to be expensive. What could you do? The right marketing. You know, Starbucks brand also allows it to do something that's quite unusual. Starbucks doesn't discount. I don't know if you ever stopped to think about that. The price of the drinks doesn't go down ever. It only goes up. And if you want to buy any products in the store, you're not going to get a deal. No 2-for-1. It's a strong brand that makes that possible. And also, Starbucks sets fairly high prices, don't they? It's not cheap. And how can they do that? Why do we keep going back? And the answer is, we have in our heads the perception that it's a little expensive, but it's a really good value. And why is it such a good value? Because Starbucks uses such sophisticated marketing. And to customers, a cup of Starbucks coffee is like a Rolex. It's like wearing a Rolex. But you only have to pay 12 pesos. So Starbucks started with one store. And it survived, and it grew, and it became global. And today the company, frankly, is writing its own future. It's creating its own future. It's a giant corporation. However, it's still dynamic, very inventive. Starbucks is somehow meeting the demands of the public today, people like you and me, and at the same time, it's coming up with new ways to make us happy tomorrow. This is the summary of some of the ideas we've talked about. And if you download the slides from the website, you'll have this list too. And as you can see, we've now finished all 10 of the hurdles. And now we sprint to the finish, right? Let's talk with the leaders of new ventures, the people who come to you and say, I have a business idea and I want to make sure it's okay. Would you listen to me? We need more of them to be successful. They're our future. So success in the hurdles and success in business has a really great sound to it, a soundtrack. And I'm going to play the soundtrack in just a moment, but I'm going to give you a little hint first. I'd like you to look at the man wearing green and black. Green and black. He's sort of over on the right. And there's going to be quite a bit of noise now. Escucha.
Well, Trammell maybe got the best start there, but just hits that first hurdle, and Sharman's going well with Parchment. Some real work to do here. Trammell leading it, Parchment trying to get back into it, but look at Will Sharman having a great race, but here comes Parchment now. The Jamaican gets there.
He said, the Jamaican gets there. The Jamaican gets there, and as you can see, he got there in 13.5 seconds. Now, many of you have been successful in business. And I think that some of you have heard that excitement and that kind of soundtrack of getting there. I have. I've experienced that. And I think it's important that we help other people finish the race first so that they can get there, so that they can be right from the start. Ustedes han sido una audiencia maravillosa. Y muchísimas gracias a mis amigos a Banco Dex.
Zev, thank you so much. It is really amazing that you've had all these people engaged up to now. And we have a lot of questions coming in through our app. So I'm going to share some of them because we received over a dozen questions for you. The first one, and it is connected with some of the things you were talking in your presentation, is how to keep the quality and same brand identity along the overwhelming growth of Starbucks. What were the priorities at the time? And this is a question from Tekus.
Good question. Thank you. Gordon Bowker, the man with the beard, the marketing guru, made sure from the very beginning, I was shocked myself, that we managed our brand. Nobody else could use it. You could only use it in certain ways. There was a plan each time we opened a store for how the logo was going to be applied. And pretty quickly, we had a great look for the company. Now, the company today has a different look. It's not a brown logo, it's a green logo. But if you go into a Starbucks store or buy a Starbucks product, you'll see they have very tight control over their logo. As a matter of fact, if you want to get a very interesting letter in your mailbox, you should come up with a logo that looks a little bit like the Starbucks logo. They'll come after you in seconds because they're brand managers. And I must say that the three founders were also, in their own way, brand managers.
The second question I have for you is with regards to the organization. What was the key for success in the process with regards to the communication strategy inside the organization? This is a question from Carlos Andrés Serna.
In the beginning, not in the beginning, when Starbucks, in its 8th year, we had about 120, 130 employees at that point. And I think we were very much like a family. Everybody knew everybody. We had a couple of parties every year, pretty great parties. And there was a great feeling of camaraderie. We were into something. And it helped that our customers really liked the business. They really liked coming into our stores, and we knew many of the customers too. So it was a very rewarding sort of affair. Now, as the company got bigger, after 1985, say, an investment was made, as I said, in systems that would enable people to be trained well and also to feel that they were part of something. You should be so lucky as to see some of the videos of Howard Schultz speaking to 10,000 employees through the internet. He's very much involved with the people that work for the company. And so I think that that's part of the reason for the great feeling in the company. And that's why when you go into a Starbucks store anywhere in the world, the employees are kind of happy and they want to talk to you about coffee.
Next question. And I think I'm going to tweak this one a little bit because you're seeing right now the company from the outside. So
Yes.
what are the new challenges for the company, and how did Colombian coffee impact your company at the time, Starbucks?
Oh, in the early days, you know, we had bins of coffee, and our employees would shovel coffee into bags. And I can tell you that at that time, that was the era of Juan Valdez and the image of the campesino with the burro. Remember those days? Well, now that's been adopted by the coffee chain, right, by the coffee bar chain. But back in the 70s, that logo really applied to a major effort in Colombia to export coffee of high quality. And it worked. Our customers were very excited about Colombia. We had a Colombian Supremo. That's a grade of coffee. What was the other part of the question? Oh, what was the other part of that question?
The other part of the question is Colombian coffee. How did Colombian coffee play in your equation?
What was the first part?
The first part of the question is, what are the challenges that you see from the outside with regards to Starbucks?
Oh, I think Starbucks is greatly challenged by some of its competitors. And I'm thinking particularly of the category that I called same price direct competitors, like a Juan Valdez store. Starbucks has a lot of competition like that. And there are what are called third wave coffee companies, like the one I mentioned, Devotion or Bourbon. Those are third wave companies. They're very experimental and really into new ways of doing things. So I think what happened, judging from the outside, I think what happened at Starbucks, they said, you know, all those little companies, they're getting pretty good, and they're starting to take customers from us, so we better do something that demonstrates to the world that we know what we're doing too, that we're not just a giant corporation. So what they've done is they've developed a new brand. It's called Starbucks Reserve. So there's Starbucks, and then there's Starbucks Reserve. And reserve coffees are more expensive, they're quite fine, and Starbucks has begun opening, I think there's going to be one on each continent. The first one is in Seattle, I think the second one will be in New York, then London, Beijing, Tokyo. These unbelievable facilities called Starbucks Reserve Roasteries. If you can imagine a coffee bar and a coffee store and a little roasting plant that costs $10 million, 10 million American dollars. That's what the Starbucks Reserve Roastery is. And I hope sometime in your life you get to see one, but if you can't go there, click on one of the photograph websites and ask for Starbucks Reserve coffees, and you will see pictures that will blow your mind. That's an initiative of the company. It's very strong right now, and I think it's an initiative to demonstrate to their customers that, oh yeah, we're just as good as those innovative, wonderful people down the street.
So I'm going to ask two final questions. You told us about the worst cup of coffee you ever had in your life. Which has been the best, or are they both at the same time? And
I need the first part. I didn't quite hear the first part.
Excuse me?
I didn't hear the first part.
Is that you told us about the worst cup of coffee you ever had in your life. Which has been the best, or is it both at the same time? This is from Mario Ramirez.
Well, I have to tell you that if you asked my wife, she would say that the best coffee, brewed coffee in the world, is the cup of espresso I make on my home espresso machine every morning for the two of us. That's the best cup of coffee. But if you can't have that cup, I'm sorry. You know, I find, well, I told you I've been to 15 coffee bars in Colombia in 5 days. And I thought they were all kind of interesting, each in their own way. I don't agree with some of the way things, in a couple of cases I thought the coffee was roasted a little lightly, a little cinnamony color. But that's just my preference. I like dark roasted coffee. But in almost all of the stores, it was quite interesting. This one was shocking to me. On my way here yesterday, we stopped at a gas station so that I could see what kind of coffee was for sale in it. And we went in, there was an espresso machine in the gas station. So I ordered a cup of espresso. It was pretty good. So it's a little hard to tell which is the best cup of coffee.
And the final question. In every process, there are always struggles. Which was the biggest obstacle when you created Starbucks?
I've already mentioned to you that one of the big problems that we had is that in the second year we grew too fast and almost ran out of money. I will never forget what that was like. If any of you have ever had that happen to you, there's sort of a sound that goes with it. It's your telephone ringing. And do you know who's calling? It's the people you owe money. That's what it's like when times get tough, when you run out of money. I think also we had some situations where we entered selling coffee beans to supermarkets. And we did it too early. It was 1974. It was too early. And too early in the development of the gourmet coffee business. So we went into this business, and then we had to come out of it. It broke my heart. That was an initiative that I started, and we just had to give it up because it wasn't working very well. By that I mean it wasn't profitable.
So thank you very much, Zev.
Thank you.
Un aplauso para
Thank you.
Zev. Thank you for being here.